You may know them from that knock at your door, or these sprawling iconic temples, or maybe they're nostalgic TV commercials. Even the Broadway parody, The Book of Mormon, was a runaway hit. With almost 17 million members worldwide and 200,000 in Canada, the Mormon Church isn't the world's biggest religion, but it is one of the wealthiest.
The Mormon Church will have you to believe that it's a religion that dabbles in business. They are a business dabbling in religion.
People want to bang on the church and say, well, you've got all that money in reserve. Yeah, and it's a good idea for other people to follow that example.
Why does God, a God of miracles, require all this money?
But has the church built its wealth on the backs of taxpayers in Canada and around the world?
There's live questions about whether the church has engaged in wide-scale tax avoidance or illegal wide-scale tax evasion.
We have been mischaracterized since 1830. That's always been the case. I don't think it will ever go away.
Do you think that this is a case of fraud?
Of course I do. Absolutely, it's fraud.
I'm Mark Kelly in Salt Lake City, Utah, home of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a church shrouded in secrecy and mired in controversy, involving complaints about homophobia and how the church is managing its vast fortune with connections to Canada. This is a story about whistleblowers from Alberta to Australia and stunning financial revelations as we investigate the Mormons' books. This is the Fifth Estate.
These are members of the Mormon Church, lining up in Salt Lake City, not to worship, but to quit. An angry illustration of a church in crisis, a crisis that reaches into Canada and into the pockets of Canadian taxpayers. Southwest Alberta, marked by rolling ranches and fertile farmland. And towering over it all, this temple in the town of Cardston. Settled in 1887, Cardston was the first outpost in Canada of what was then a new religion, the Mormon Church.
What is the significance of this temple?
Well, this was the first temple that was built and dedicated outside of the States.
So it's a big part of certainly the church's Canadian history then.
Absolutely, yeah. Like this goes back more than 100 years.
As a child, Nigel Kennett visited this temple every year with his family, devout Mormons. He was married here 14 years ago. His faith is solid as these granite walls.
So this is the closest thing we have to Salt Lake City North.
Yeah, exactly.
But then Nigel learned something about the finances of the church he felt he had to share.
That had been weighing on my mind for years. Sometimes I was like, one of these days I'm just going to write a letter. I'm going to send it to a news outlet just to clear my own conscience so that I can say I did everything that I could.
Nigel cleared his conscience with an email to the Fifth Estate.
My desire to present this story is not driven by malice, but by the belief that by making the issue known may drive some change.
So we met with Nigel, speaking out for the first time. Little did we know where this story would take us.
Do you feel that the church is being honest with you?
I don't, but I've heard it said that lying isn't necessarily the words that you're saying, but it's the intent to deceive people. And I think that the church has built an empire by deceiving people.
Hey! I got you away!
How many times do I have to tell you not to slam the door?
Remember these TV ads? They help build the Mormon brand, faith, family, and honesty.
When you ignore accomplishments, you rob your children and yourself of some very satisfying moments.
Hey!
I got you away!
Great! Come on up, let's take a look at it.
Today, the church is a huge international operation with almost 17 million members and some 300 temples in 74 countries.
As we strive to follow Jesus Christ, we reach out to those in need.
This recent video highlights the church's branding now, alleviating global suffering.
The real overarching goal is, what are we going to do with the relationships that we develop so that we can actually make life better for the people that are suffering?
Since 1985, the church says it's given away a total of $3.5 billion in humanitarian aid. That money originates from tithing, donations from church members. Unlike most churches, tithing is not optional. It's a commandment for the Mormon faithful.
One of the first things a bishop must do to help the needy is ask them to pay their tithing. Like the widow, if a destitute family is faced with the decision of paying their tithing or eating, they should pay their tithing. The bishop can help them with their food.
Since he was baptized at the age of 8, Nigel has been faithfully giving tithing money to his church.
And I was broke. I took out student loans. I was working a couple jobs. I was working a night job and then another retail job. And then for me to be considered worthy to go to the temple, I had to be contributing 10% of my income.
What was your understanding as you were paying tithing, where that money was going?
I always was taught that there was a strong emphasis on humanitarian aid with tithing, is that like you pay tithing and that it furthers the Lord's work, but that it's also to go towards people who need help.
Nigel's an accountant. He was working on the books of a church of a different faith when he saw how much their members gave to charity. So he looked into the Mormons' books and was stunned by where their donations were going.
As you identified, I'm an accountant. And so in Canada, there's a charities directorate, and then was able to see the full financial information. And I was floored. I was like, holy cow, why don't I see qualified donees for like the Red Cross or the food bank? And I was like, what the heck? $100 million to BYU?
BYU is Brigham Young University. Opened in 1875, it's a private university in Provo, Utah, owned and operated by the Mormon Church. 98% of the students enrolled here are Mormons. So how much Canadian money has been flowing to BYU? We obtained Canadian charity records and found something unusual. Starting in 2007, the Mormon Church in Canada began moving mass amounts of money to BYU. The biggest year on record was 2016, when almost $110 million was gifted to the university. That was nearly 70% of all the tithing money collected that year by the Canadian Church. American Lars Nielsen graduated from BYU. It was at Harvard when his Mormon belief bubble would burst.
I do believe that my experience at Harvard University, I think it liberalized me. It opened me up to the possibility that my church, my religion, wasn't all that it had said that it was, and allowed me to be a more critical thinker.
Lars was questioning his faith as well as the church's finances. That's when he too saw the Canadian cash pipeline to BYU, and he has a theory about that.
Why is that money going to BYU?
Yeah, well, the church wants to grow and create Zion and to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. Where do they want to do that? They want to do it in America, in the Promised Land. And Canada is attached to the Promised Land, but it's not the Promised Land. But they do have a significant portion of tithe payers there, so they would like to get the money out. How do you get the money out of Canada legally?
Legally, the church in Canada can't transfer money to its parent church in the U.S. and retain its charitable status. But it can move as much money as it wants to an American university like BYU. But there is a key condition.
There is in your tax system a loophole that says if it's used for educational purposes that benefit Canadians outside of Canada, then you can use the money that way. And they rationalize, oh, well, maybe 1% of BYU have got Canadians. They say, as long as it's benefiting anyone who is Canadian at BYU.
Even if it benefits one Canadian student there?
Even if it benefits one student.
There are more than 85,000 students enrolled at BYU's 3 campuses. In 2018, the last available figures we could find, about 1,400 were Canadians. That's less than 2% of the student body. So how much money has the Canadian Church given BYU? Well, more than $1 billion, donated by Mormons, all eligible for tax deductions for those donations. When you add it all up, those deductions cost the Canadian Treasury as much as $280 million. In an emailed statement to the Fifth Estate, the church said it is using a legitimate and well-known tax provision to transfer money to BYU, and points out more donations were retained and used in Canada than the U.S. We crunched the numbers. Since 2007, 46% of Canadian tithing money left the country. Which raises the question, what exactly are Canadian taxpayers supporting? When we come back, we go to BYU.
What's it like to be bisexual at BYU?
Oh gosh, it's absolutely awful. Because anyone can report you to the honor code office. But the thing is, that's the reality for queer students everywhere, you know, and we all live with that fear.
Brigham Young University represents everything the Mormon Church stands for. Moral, pure, and squeaky clean.
I believe you to be the very best, and I'm counting on you to be consumed with conviction.
The staples of typical college life are forbidden here. No booze, no drugs, no smoking, even coffee is a no-go.
Cherish the gospel of Jesus Christ and live it. The world needs you.
Dubbed the Lord's University, our investigation has revealed that since 2007, the Mormon Church in Canada has donated more than $1 billion to BYU. Tax-deductible charitable donations underwritten by Canadian taxpayers.
We followed the Canadian money to the campus of Brigham Young University just south of Salt Lake City. Here we're told students can get a world-class educational experience, unless they happen to be gay.
Brigham Young. This is the place, this is the spot. I mean, after everything you've been through, what does it mean here in front of Brigham Young?
I mean, it's difficult because I really wanted BYU to be the place, and then to come somewhere so central to your religion and be told this is the place, but not for you.
That's tough.
Yeah.
Their Mormon faith led Jeannie Williams and Canadian Jacqueline Foster to BYU. But once they got here, that faith was severely tested after they both came out on campus.
I'm bisexual, okay? I'm not straight. I don't struggle with same-sex attraction. I struggle with people who struggle with my same-sex attraction.
Back in 2020, protests erupted over BYU's honor code, which forbids homosexual behavior. Homosexual behavior includes not only sexual relations between members of the same sex, but all forms of physical intimacy that give expression to homosexual feelings. That includes hugging, dating, even holding hands on campus.
Nearly 50 students and allies made their way up Y Mountain in Provo, their mission to send a beacon of hope.
The famous Y on the mountain overlooking the BYU campus was lit up with rainbow colors. Faced with mounting pressure, the school lifted the ban.
And everyone starts taking these pictures of themselves kissing their same-sex partners out right in front of the statue of Brigham Young, right in front of the administration building. And I started crying because it was so, you know, what we'd been hoping for this whole time.
But the victory lasted only weeks. The church intervened, saying same-sex relationships are not compatible with their faith.
One of the area authorities sent a letter to BYU basically saying, no, like, you may have removed the language, but the church still doesn't support queer people dating or holding hands or kissing, and so they can't do that here at BYU, and everyone felt very panicked. Like, I just came out as having had a girlfriend for 2 years.
It was around then Jeannie got a call from the manager of her student residence.
And he's like, your sexuality is making your roommates uncomfortable. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, they've come in, they don't feel safe around you, that kind of thing. And then before I know it, I have to leave.
Jeannie, Canadian Mormons, through their tithing, are contributing hundreds of millions of dollars to BYU. Tell them, what's it like to be bisexual at BYU?
Oh my goodness, you're so scared because they allow this atmosphere of homophobia to permeate. I have a best friend from back home. Sometimes I kiss her on the cheek. People stare and you're like, oh, what if they take that wrong? Because anyone can report you to the Arnicud office. All they need is your name and go, you did this.
I guess my last question for you is why are you still here?
I'm still here because despite everything that's happened, I believe in BYU. I know that God loves me, and I know that the church at its best would love me.
Jacqueline has graduated BYU and wonders why, with all the need in Canada, the Mormons keep bankrolling BYU.
It does raise the question for me, you know, why is it easier for the church to move Canadian religious donations out by moving it to a private American school?
But what the Mormon Church does with its money is much bigger than BYU.
Cracks started showing in the church's wall of secrecy, and it all started here in Las Vegas, Sin City no less, and the church would soon realize what happens in Vegas doesn't always stay in Vegas.
Here on the outskirts of Las Vegas, Ryan McKnight walks in the desert of his decisions. Once a faithful Mormon, he quit the church, accusing it of decades of racism and homophobia.
I've dedicated a lot of my professional career to ensuring that truth and appropriate transparency exist, you know, out there. As a government regulator, I worked for many years as a government regulator.
He started his own website, Mormon Leaks, to expose secrets, including what the church does with its tithing money.
Breaking news into the live desk right now. New documents have just been released by Mormon Leaks. Take a look here.
We broke a story about the church owning $32 billion in U.S. stock holdings through these 13 random LLCs that they had tried to hide.
The funds control about $31.9 billion in investments. The LDS Church declined to comment for this story.
The reason why they have tried for so long to keep these portfolios under wraps is because they are concerned that it would lower people's willingness to pay tithing.
What does that say to you about the church?
Yeah, I personally would find that problematic, you know, because that's a dishonesty.
Which led him to start digging into the church's private land holdings in the U.S., his most ambitious investigation into the church to date.
Do you see the Mormon Church as a business?
The Mormon Church will have you to believe that it's a religion that dabbles in business, but the evidence clearly shows that they are a business dabbling in religion, 100%.
Ryan was about to get some unexpected help from the other side of the continent. Josh Bigley is now an ex-Mormon living in PEI. He feels the church has lost its way in its pursuit of wealth.
It's been a long time since I've had to quote that scripture, but the idea is if you bring your tithing to God, that He will open the windows of heaven and you will have everything that you need. That prosperity gospel is false. Jesus never taught that. It's not the way that the scriptures should be interpreted, but it's the way that Mormon culture interprets it.
Like Ryan in Las Vegas, Josh wanted to know where the church was spending all its money, so he scoured financial records.
Were you surprised at what you found?
Stunned. Absolutely stunned. I couldn't believe how many corporate entities in the US there were. I actually didn't know. I wasn't sure where to go next. And that's when I realized the best thing for me to do was to reach out to Mormon Leaks.
So Ryan and Josh teamed up to add up what the church quietly owned.
we essentially cracked a code that allowed us to open up the window to this massive real estate holding.
When you build out these complex corporate structures, you do it for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to hide.
They built a massive database listing thousands of properties owned by the church, information most people didn't know.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints owns over 1.7 million acres. The portfolio is estimated to be worth $15.8 billion.
This past spring, they released the results of their investigation.
What we uncovered is that in terms of dollar value, even if you go on the conservative end of it, they are clearly, without a doubt, the wealthiest single landowner in the United States. There's no question about it. Nobody comes even close.
Huge amounts of money in both the US and in Canada, and maybe abroad, who knows? Why? What's the reason for it? Is it a rainy day fund? And if so, what does that rainy day look like?
Ryan and Josh spent 2 years collaborating on their project, and through all that time, they'd never actually met before. Until now.
I gotta give you a hug, man.
How are you doing?
It's good to meet you. Good to meet you too. Oh my goodness.
When you uncovered what you did uncover, what in the end did it tell you about truth and transparency?
That it's hard, that people are highly motivated by money. I think that's the one thing for me that I observed was when there's money, the accumulation of wealth involved, truth and transparency often take a back seat.
Anytime an organization's operational budget is primarily made up of tax-free donations, from my perspective, they have an ethical obligation to be transparent about their finances.
When we come back, our investigation into the Mormons' books takes us to Australia.
I wanted to acknowledge that I did not give that money willingly. I gave it because I had to, and I don't believe that rubbish they're peddling. I want my money back.
Thank you. I am honored beyond description to be here with all of you today.
As questions around the Mormons' finances grew louder each day, in a rare move, the church faced the press.
The last time a senior leader of our church spoke at the press club was in 2000, President Gordon B. Hinckley. It's good to be back.
Here in D.C., the Mormons came out swinging.
The LDS Church has more capability than any other church in the country to help eliminate poverty. What more could the church do in terms of humanitarian efforts here?
People want to bang on the church and say, well, you've got all that money in reserve. Yeah, and it's a good idea for other people to follow that example.
The church said it was saving and spending, releasing a report which said in 2021 alone, it provided $900 million in aid to those in need around the world.
Generous donations from our church members, as well as friends of the faith, allow us to support the initiatives I just described and many, many others.
But with its massive investment fund and property holdings, the church actually gives away just a small fraction of money collected for the needy. Here in Australia, it's a completely different story. According to government tax filings, the Mormon Church in Australia donates a staggering 70% of its tithing income to charity, making it one of the biggest charities in the country. So, is this a case of unbridled generosity, or is it something else? To answer that question, we teamed up with this Australian journalist and a team from 60 Minutes Australia.
So the idea then that in Australia, it was disproportionately charitable, that 70 cents in the dollar was going out as charity, just made no sense.
Even less sense when you see how the giving has increased dramatically, while the number of Mormons in Australia has declined.
As recently as 2014, the amount of donations that went through it was $200,000. But we see within 5 years, that's gone from that figure to $73 million a year. We can see that figure there. So we're seeing an escalation in donations, which is 2,000-fold over time. It's an incredible amount of extra money.
From $200,000 to $73 million in charitable donations. But why? That led us to a Mormon insider with a story of his own to tell.
Do you consider yourself ex-Mormon or post-Mormon?
Gee, I haven't really thought about the distinction. I never even use those terms to describe myself. I don't know how I describe myself, just I think I've become a free thinker.
A free thinker, a barrister, and a law professor who held senior roles with the Mormon Church.
I was a substantial tithe payer, and I happily parted with a lot of money on an annual basis.
How much money do you think you gave the church?
Oh, it'd be in the hundreds of thousands, but may even be more.
Unlike in Canada, tithing money isn't tax deductible. Mormons here only get a tax break when the church donates their money to charities.
It's very much smoke and mirrors.
Neville wonders why else have the church's donations to charity suddenly grown more than 300 times in recent years.
And that's where I come to the point about, well, of course, with its preponderantly corporate structure, what else is it going to do? It's going to bring money in like a vacuum cleaner to benefit the shareholders. That's what it does.
What is the benefit to the church for pumping $70 million through this charitable trust?
The benefit for the church is that it gives a tax advantage to Australian Mormons. If that money was just tithing, the Australian Mormons would not get a tax deduction. Therefore, they would have to pay a lot more in tithing than they otherwise would.
Who's the loser?
The loser is the Australian government and the Australian people. There's hundreds of millions of dollars of money that should have been taxed that hasn't.
The Mormon Church's charity is now one of the biggest in Australia, and yet...
For the main charity that donates $70 to $100 million a year, it has no paid staff, not one.
In Australia?
In Australia.
Well, how can that be?
Well, the church says that a handful of volunteers make these decisions. You don't run one of the biggest charities in the country with no paid staff. It doesn't make any sense.
Neville wants to know if the Australian charity is run from Salt Lake City, which would violate Australia's tax law. So he's part of a complaint to the charities regulator.
You know, when you join the dots, this seems to be a pattern of behaviour that doesn't really favour the church very well in how it looks as a church.
You know, it's walking like a duck, it's squawking like a duck, but the church is telling me it's an albatross. But in the end, you come to the point where you realise that, yes, it is a duck.
From what he's seen, Ben believes the Australian Tax Office should investigate.
There's live questions about whether the church has engaged in wide-scale tax avoidance or illegal wide-scale tax evasion.
In a statement, the Mormon Church insisted it has not violated any tax laws in Australia. Donations are used for overseas aid projects that satisfy Australia charities and tax rules.
I mean, I'll be just very straightforward. I want my tithing money back.
Sue, Trevor, and their family spent 2 decades in the church.
So this is Nathaniel, he's my youngest, and he's a professional dancer, and yeah, he was classically trained.
And how important was his story into your break with the church?
Yeah, it was pretty big, actually.
Then they came to the crossroads, their family or their faith.
That's so. Nathaniel is gay, and the church has a very limited acceptance of gay people. I've been at priesthood meetings where there were just a few people who all knew that my son was gay, and they would say, well, we have to love them, but we don't have to like them.
I was actually working at the Australian Crown Commission when I got the call that my son had attempted suicide. Ugh. Sorry.
After leaving the church, they started asking questions about the Mormons' wealth.
We knew they had plenty of money, but we always assumed the money was just being used for good, charitable purposes.
Well, that's the messaging that you receive through the church anyway.
But with allegations of tax avoidance and billions invested in U.S. properties, Sue and Trevor have joined ex-Mormons in the U.S. who want to file a lawsuit to reclaim their tithing money.
But it wasn't a gift. It was extorted out of us. And I want that acknowledged. I want it acknowledged that I did not give that money willingly. I gave it because I had to. And I don't believe that rubbish they're peddling. I want my money back.
Here in the Australian capital, the political opposition demanded an immediate investigation by the country's tax office into the Mormons' finances. Well, there's a new government in place here now, and the man who demanded that immediate investigation is now the country's minister in charge of charities.
His name is Andrew Lee.
Mr. Minister, Mark Kelly from Canadian Broadcasting.
Lovely to see you, Mark.
Cheers. Have a seat. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We asked him about the calls by Neville and others for an investigation by the country's tax office.
While in opposition, you demanded for an immediate investigation by the tax office. You're now in power, but is that investigation currently underway?
Well, those investigations take place at arm's length from government, as it should be.
Lee says he can't confirm if there is an investigation, but he did say this.
Oh, I think it's important that everyone is playing by the rules, and I think that when you've got anyone that appears to be not playing by the rules, then that can undermine the integrity of the tax system.
And was your concern here that the church was not paying its fair share in taxes?
I think it's important that all charities are appropriately scrutinised for their tax behaviour. Charity shouldn't be a way of sheltering yourself from appropriate tax payments.
Neville asks what kind of church sits on profits from generous tax breaks instead of directing it to people who need it, especially in developing countries.
But what, to use your word, what is evil about a church saving money for a rainy day?
Because the rainy day is definitely here. So yes, I do hold to what I said. I think it is an evil doctrine in third world countries at least.
When we come back, the biggest revelation yet.
And if they do something that's illegal, I'm going to call them out on it because that's the right thing to do, and they taught me that.
We have been mischaracterized since 1830. That's always been the case. I don't think it will ever go away.
In 2012, the president of the Mormon Church cut the ribbon on this luxury shopping mall in downtown Salt Lake City. It's built right across the street from the Mormons' majestic temple.
It's a symbol of their prosperity, it's a symbol of their prominence. It means that something is working.
But Lars Nielsen, a sixth-generation Mormon, says this mall is more than a symbol of Mormon prosperity. It's also a symbol of deceit.
Lars Nielsen went public after his brother, a former investment manager for the LDS Church, filed a whistleblower complaint to the IRS.
Lars is now at the center of one of the most explosive revelations to rock the Mormon faith in decades.
So in some ways I could say that it's the Mormon Church's fault that I am an IRS whistleblower because I'm just evangelizing the truth as I see it.
He's one of two brothers who revealed a tightly held secret within the church, an investment fund worth $100 billion, built from tithing money.
If you instead take those monies, allow the tax deduction, and then you never perform any of those types of services, you're in essence just stealing a little bit of money from everybody.
I mean, you have billions of dollars in Apple and in, fossil fuel burning companies, energy companies. All of these vehicles you wouldn't think are what churches would invest in. And so that rattled people. And then the lack of activity in doing something that that money is designed to be used for. Nothing religious, educational, or charitable.
This is Lars' first feature-length TV interview after going public in 2019.
Why do you believe the church was hiding this truth from its members?
If people knew that the church had $100 billion and they weren't putting it to any use, they would be less inclined to continue donating to the church. A lot of members of the Mormon Church have been clamoring to get their tithing back. People are upset about this. They know that the ethics are not Christ's ethics.
The complaint to the IRS was filed by Lars' brother David, a senior manager who oversaw the fund and its ties to that shopping mall.
And then he started to hear that the leaders of the Mormon Church were saying things like, not one penny of tithing money was being used to build the City Creek Mall. And that blatantly wasn't true. He had seen the journal ledgers. He had been in on these conversations. He knew that $1.4 billion had been spent to shore up the City Creek Mall.
The complaint alleges the Mormon Investment Fund should lose tax-exempt status because it's spending money on commercial investments.
If they do something that's illegal, I'm going to call them out on it because that's the right thing to do, and they taught me that.
In a statement to the Fifth Estate, the church said it did use money from the investment fund for the mall, but specified it was earnings of invested reserve funds. So profits from the tithing, not the tithing itself. Lars says more than anything, the IRS needs to investigate.
Do you think that this is a case of fraud?
Of course I do. Absolutely, it's fraud.
When contacted, the IRS wouldn't discuss the status of the complaint with us. Back in Canada, we learned the secret fund was used to invest in corporations like Shopify, banks, and energy companies. But the church's financial footprint in Canada is even bigger than that. The church has disclosed $1 billion in assets in Canada. Now, what exactly those assets are is hard to track down. But a land title search has revealed at least 6 ranches, including this sprawling property in southern Alberta. We combed through hundreds of entries and dozens of land databases. Those ranches add up to 60,000 acres, with an estimated value between $200 and $300 million. Outside of the church's inner sanctum, no one knows the church's net worth, but it insists a generous portion of its wealth goes to charity.
Critics of the church, and in particular a number of ex-Mormons who I've spoken to, both in the United States and Australia, say the church, compared to other religions or a number of Christian denominations, is actually, it's not a very charitable entity. It doesn't spend a lot of money out there. It doesn't create hospitals. It doesn't create social welfare. It doesn't, do soup kitchens, that kind of thing.
What they've done is they've manipulated not only the general congregations or the general membership, but they've duped governments that are strapped for cash as it is. The church is taking away government's ability to fund healthcare, the ability to fund education, the ability to provide other essential services. They've done it at the expense of taxpayer dollars.
We'd been requesting our own interview with the media-shy Mormons for months, even knocking on their door at the Salt Lake City headquarters.
Well, the communications person we've been trying to reach now for weeks to get an interview with somebody from the church, we're told is now out of town and unavailable, and there's no one else we can speak to, and they will not accept walk-in interviews with any official from the church. So the kind lady at reception said, "You're out of luck."
In an emailed statement, the church says it believes in obeying the law, and the church and its affiliated entities pay all taxes and levies as required, adding these entities also contribute to local communities and economies.
Christ was mischaracterized. We have been mischaracterized since 1830 when the church was reestablished. That's always been the case. I don't think it will ever go away. We don't like it, but we don't spend all of our time trying to respond to it. We have a mission to fulfill, and we're moving forward to accomplish that mission.
In the end, our whistleblowers in 3 different countries say it's time for the church to be transparent about its wealth and time to open up the Mormons' books.
Most churches in this country run on $1 to $7 million operating budgets. They make money from bake sales. Small community congregationalist type churches, shouldn't be subjected to a severe burden of reporting. But giga churches have to. And there are mega churches in this country. Maybe there are a few in Canada too. But in this country, there is one giga church, and it's the Mormon Church.
It makes me feel pretty nauseous, to be quite honest, because although it's good to see a church investing funds in blue chip investments, that has to be balanced against how those funds could be used to benefit the lives of individuals and families. And even if it were only individuals and families within the church, a lot of people who are suffering could have their suffering alleviated if instead of diverting those monies into investment, they invested in individuals and families.
Do you fear that by speaking out, you're jeopardizing a lot?
Oh, absolutely. One thing, because I am still a member of the church. I still hold membership there. Oftentimes what will happen is that if the church considers someone to have broken those covenants or to have spoken ill, that they will excommunicate that individual. And then I thought about my kids. I thought about my kids and how I wanted them to know that they can make changes. And then I decided, you know what? I'm not ashamed of what I did. I am not afraid of anything that has come out of this. And I want my kids to know that I wanted to be an example for them, to show them that they can be comfortable with who they are, whatever they are, and to never turn their back on themselves. There's definitely been a change in perspective. The church teaches that the temple should always be that focal point in your life. The temple has become that physical reminder of greed for me.